sponsored by the James Madison Council and the National Endowment for the Arts.
Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Library of Congress National Book Festival. My name is Amal El-Mohtar, and I'm here with P. Jelly Clark to talk about his book, A Master of Jinn. I'm super excited about this. So I'm just going to, while we're sorting some logistics, just to let you know, if you have any questions, do please drop them into the place that has been indicated for sharing your questions. About 10 minutes before the end of this segment, I'm going to open it up to taking some of those questions and hopefully answering them. Here we are.
Yay.
Hey, Jelly.
Hey, Amal, how you doing?
I am okay. I am just realizing that I'm disoriented with the nature of the split screen thing here, so bear with me for a second.
You're over here, now you're over there.
So yeah, I'm like exactly. I've got. So I'm just going to double check that everything is okay here. I think it's okay. I think it's. I just want to make sure someone behind the scenes knows that I'm seeing myself double. I don't know if that's normal or not, but anyway, it's fine.
Oh, you're not. Yeah, I'm seeing myself twice below and above, but I guess that's normal. You might be seeing yourself too, so that's fine. As long as you can also see me.
I can see you, and you look fantastic,
great.
As does your amazing backdrop of books.
Yeah.
And is that like, it looks like there's an astrolabe behind you as well.
Oh, what is that? No, it's something funky from one of those places like, I don't know, like West Elm or something. I have no idea what it means. But yeah, I can see that. It looks like an astrolabe, very old globe. I should come up with a story about something deeper.
I think it actually, to like super smoothly segue into talking about your book, actually, there's a lot of stuff in your book about, mishmashes of artifacts from lots of different places, all kind of serving interesting aesthetic purposes. So before getting into that, though, so I just wanted to start by saying your book, A Master of Jinn, which is so delightful and which is anyway, I've been enjoying the world of this book for some time. The first introduction that I had to it was The Haunting of Tramcar 015, the novella that you wrote in it a few years ago, and I adored it. I reviewed it for NPR. I think I literally said this book is perfect, and I loved it so much. And I was so delighted to learn at that point that there was a novel in the works. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the world, the world of the Dead Jinn universe, essentially. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of that project and when you knew that it was going to be a world you wanted to have multiple projects in?
Oh man, it's so hard to, you often sometimes have to go back and retcon to figure out where was I at this time, like what was I thinking? And the genesis of this world was actually a 2016 novelette that was published by Tor called The Dead Jinn in Cairo. And I don't know how the story itself and the world itself came about. I know it started with me. Simply having an image of the character Fatma being a detective and having this on a case of a dead jinn. I didn't know much more, but I knew I wanted to do something with that. And I always say that somehow this world must have been born. I was in grad school at the time. I was adjuncting, teaching a lot. And I think it was somewhere born between reading Edward Said's Orientalism and watching a lot of Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers. I think I wanted to write an anti-colonial story, and I wanted it to also be a little bit funny, if possible. And my innate sci-fi nature kind of whipped all this together.
I think that's actually, so two things in there that I really appreciate is the fact that so often when people talk about decolonial or anti-colonial or even post-colonial, all things that mean, slight variations on similar things, whenever people talk about that, I think there is an understandable sense of seriousness. These are obviously very serious topics with very serious history and stuff like that. But one of the things that I love about this world and the way that you've played with it is just how much humor there is there. Like Tramcar is like, if you'll forgive my saying so, it feels like a romp, you know? It is extremely funny. And it's full of characters with very, you know, comic turns to their personas and stuff like that. There's a kind of like buddy element to the investigators in that book. And similarly, like Fatima and her new partner in A Master of Jinn also, you know, have some of that kind of buddy investigators, new partners tension that you see in a lot of comedies. Did you, like, was the desire to have humor in there something that just kind of came out naturally out of the characters, or did you feel more comfortable writing comedy than other things?
Yeah, I think that I probably my sense of humor. I like having comedy in things, and so I have an odd sense of humor where I try a bit of I put comedy and levity in places perhaps where most people wouldn't think. But you know, at the end of the day, I was writing this story. It's set with a bureaucracy. Bureaucracies are inherently funny to me. And it has a bureaucracy whose job it is to investigate supernatural activities. I have Jin corporally walking the world, and it just seemed like it was a place where humor would fit, right? As people are trying to understand this world, and it also became a way where I could talk about, like you said, talk about anti-colonialism and decolonialism and all these other things, and also make it entertaining in some ways, even if it's a serious topic as I'm trying to tell this story. Because at the end of the day, of course, I want to entertain people as I tell this story, as they get all these other little nuggets as well.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things, so a thing that I sometimes say to people, as you know, as a critic, as a reviewer, I often shy away from reviewing fantasy novels specifically, I guess, that are explicitly set in the Middle East or that have like some very Middle Eastern flavor to them, because my family is from Lebanon and I just know that I'm going to be very, very particular about the things in
Right.
there and stuff. And like, I was a little trepidatious before reading Tramcar. I was like, oh gosh, like Fantasy Egypt. And so one of the things that absolutely delighted me so much was to find a familiarity in the cadences of people's language. Like in this book, which is, you know, so it's in an Egypt of the early 20th century that was not colonized, thanks to partnerships with the Jinn who have, you know, come back essentially, and so, you know, they. Egypt is in the grip of a lot of social upheaval. Women have gained the right to vote. Women are holding like certain kinds of office that they didn't before and stuff. So there's a ton of change happening that feels very particular to the era in which you're setting it. But there's also so much Arabic in the way that you use place names and just like elements of speech, like when people say wallahi or when people say yallah and stuff like that. And the thing that I was astonished by was just how you threaded the needle of incorporating Arabic into, you know, it's not written in Arabic, obviously, it's written in English,
Right.
but a lot of the time when people who aren't native Arabic speakers try to incorporate Arabic into, you know, an otherwise English fantasy, it clunks hard on my ear as a native speaker. And yours really didn't. Yours was delightful and smooth and
Thank you.
made me so happy because it like was a recognizable cadence. And I was just wondering if you wanted to talk at all about, like, did you do any particular research to this? What do you have any facility with Arabic, or what was the process of researching a novel that is, you know, a sort of alternate fantastical history for a real world country?
Oh, thank you for that. I'm so happy. I like when you did the review in NPR. I was like, I got it right, and you had said that, and I was so happy. And so yeah, you know, part of this is I understand as a person who also has to, like, my parents are from the Caribbean, right? And so if I watch a movie or I read a book and it has that setting and I have to listen to patois or something, I am also quite particular, and so I probably come to these things with that sensitivity in mind. Um, and you know, I think in before I had started this story, just naturally, I think I think some of my influences came from having friends whose parents are from that part of the world, or they're from that part of the world. Having friends I have friends from Egypt, friends from even further south in Somalia and elsewhere. So I got to hear a lot of Wallahis in my time. And so some of that was picking up from things that I had heard, but also I read. There was a time when I was reading a lot of more well-known Egyptian writers, or like I was reading some Sudanese writers who were writing in Egypt and writing mystery novels. And so I think I came with that kind of influence. And I think that helped me when I was thinking about writing this. I mean, just me, I'm just a person who will, oh, look, there's a film that's set in Egypt, or a series on, Netflix. I'm going to watch this. And I don't know if I was referring back to those things when I was writing, but certainly I think over the years they'd likely influenced me. And so when I sat down to do these things, I think that I was keeping that in mind. And then last of all, I had a wonderful sensitivity reader, because I was, especially I didn't have it for The Haunting of Tramcar 015 or Dead Djinn in Cairo, but for the novel I did. And she is Egyptian herself, and though she lives in Canada, and she was very helpful in helping me thread some things, because as much as I know, as much as I was able to gather, there's nothing like someone who's much more familiar, who could help me avoid some pitfalls and just give me some ideas. And so that was certainly helpful for this novel, and I think it made it much better.
One of the things that really dazzled me about it is throughout the book, I think that there's this really interesting tension between the kind of Orientalist eclecticism that mushes together a whole bunch of different periods and backgrounds and lineages and flattens them to be like, oh yes, so the book opens with a scene in the house of a British Basha, essentially, right? A Lord Worthington, which I think is an amazing name for this particular kind of character, who is the head of like a secret society, of which there were many, right? Like there was a famous, I love it when there's a famous secret society, right? But there were real world societies like the Brotherhood of the Noble Red Man, or something like horrible, very racist things and stuff. And in this case, it's a secret society, and excuse me. This man's house is this mishmash of different architectural styles and full of, different artifacts from different parts of the world, but also like just mixing Persian and Arabian and various other things together. And you really get the sense that that's like, this is all the same thing basically, right? So we're all just going to throw these things here and it's going to be more or less the same. And I think there's this really neat tension throughout the book between that sort of approach to things and the recognition of enormous diversity in Egypt, the Egypt of obviously of our world as well, but the Egypt of the book in particular has pagan societies and pagan faiths and like old Egyptian faiths, essentially, as well as Muslim faiths and Coptic Christians and stuff like that, and all of them kind of trying to negotiate through their differences. I just wondered if that was something you wanted to speak to a little bit, because I could easily see someone perhaps unfamiliar with Orientalism looking to those two things and going, but wait, isn't it good to have a lot of different things, together and stuff like that? And yeah.
I have to thank Edward Said, who, and others who, everybody's probably familiar with those famous Orientalist paintings, right, of the quote unquote decadent East, and they're fantastic in their way. But you also, when you study them, you realize how many of them are works of fiction. Like there's a famous one that's in the Brooklyn Museum, and it's supposed to be the Moorish king or whatever, and it has this really dashing figure, and then you realize that it was done by simply a guy saw an actor in the street in Paris. He saw an African man on the street in Paris, and he decided to bring him into his shop, and he gave him all these props and everything, this mishmash of different props that he would figure would be Moorish, quote unquote, and he simply created this figure, right? And so I think in knowing that history, I wanted to be careful about those things and also want to make fun of them.
Hmm.
Like the play, that house is actually based on an actual place in in Egypt that I've actually visited, and I won't say what it is, but it was a place built by English and Frenchmen and others, and it has that mishmash of various cultures. But at the same time, as you point out, it's very true. Cairo, where I'm setting this story, of course, is a home to various cultures. And if you go to Old Cairo, for instance, and you will see various influences, whether it's Moroccan or Persian or what have you, from the various trade routes, from the various peoples who live there. And so one of the things I try to do is I try to balance between these outside perspectives trying to look in, who are trying to imitate those things, but never getting it quite right. Right? But
Hmm.
overdoing it in a sense. And I have someone like Fatma who understands this world. When you're an insider, you kind of recognize, like, nice try, but not exactly it.
Absolutely. I love Fatima so much, and
Yeah.
I'm going to try not to belabor just how much I love her. I'm going to, but one thing I actually did want to talk about is just also just how many women there are in this book and how delightful it is to see so many different women interacting and having arguments and conversations and friction and stuff with each other, and to have the story that is ostensibly in a very traditionally masculine milieu of like private investigator and stuff like that, to have it be the domain of so many women was really delightful to me. But rather than ask about that, I'm going to ask, before turning to questions in a couple of minutes. So there is a question that everyone's getting asked at the National Book Festival, and I just wanted to kind of close off with it. So
Okay.
the theme of the National Book Festival this year is "Open a Book, Open the World." And the question is, how have books opened the world for you?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. I think since I was younger, as
It's
long
an
as I
easy
can
one.
remember, I've just always been interested in books. I was the kid who my favorite thing was that my mother took my sister and I to the library, and we would just check out as many books as we wanted, and it was just this great way I could fall into a book and fall into a world. And there was a way, whether it was the fantastic or it was the real world, I could visit those places. I could understand how different people thought and different perspectives. And I still find that romance, I always say with books, when I find a really good book, I'm still, I fall into it so much that, I'm thinking about later on that night, I'll get a chance to get back to that, I'll get a chance to return to that world, and fall back into it. And so I think books have always played that function in my life. And, I'm thankful for that.
Well, it's wonderful. Um, all right. Well, actually, this is great. I will actually, since we have a couple more minutes before turning to audience
Sure.
questions, and just a reminder, audience, please do get those questions in. So I
Please
wanted
do.
to ask about Fatma and all of the kind of fantastic female characters in this book. So I was just wondering, did you was there any kind of like, I mean, Fatma was obviously the first character in this world, right, with
Yeah.
Dejin and Cairo and stuff. Um, but Tramcar was kind of focused on the two male investigators against this backdrop of women getting suffrage and stuff. And
Right.
I was just wondering, what made you want to focus on like that, the aftermath of that moment in time, or was there any particular thought process that made you focus on this cast of characters?
Yeah. I think part of it was Fatma herself was based on, in some ways, her name is actually a nod to a famous Egyptian feminist. And when I was writing the story, one of the things that's happened here is the arrival of Jinn have shaken up the world, but it's also shaken up this Egypt. And I was thinking really about notions of the quote unquote post colonial society, right? If we've ever actually
Mm,
seen one. And there's often this notion that what you'll create, like, I think when I think of in our world, when so many nations were becoming independent. I'm thinking of like the 50s and 60s, like so many of them had these idealistic notions of what they might be, right? But it turned out that
mm,
becoming a nation state and that independence also brought its own tensions and own frictions between various groups. And so I didn't want to create an Egypt that was perfect. I wanted to show that humanity was still going to have to deal with these issues. They now simply get the chance to make their own choices. And so, as I was thinking about how this allowance of this anti-colonial movement has allowed for this jump in modernity, it's allowed Egypt to be this world power, I also thought about social consequences. And so basically what I did was I looked at the feminist movements that were happening around the world, proto-feminist movements that were happening in Egypt and our world during that time. And I thought of, why not have this also be part of that revolution, right? If we're having a revolution in technology and other things, let's think about how we might have a social revolution. And with Fatma herself, kind of like representing this, I thought that in the Haunting of Tramcar 015, it just seemed to fit as this wonderful thing that's going on in the background of this, while I tell this other story that also has its discussions about gender and other things, even if the two protagonists are men.
Yeah. It's so fantastic and so well balanced. Oh, I love it so much.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to turn to some audience questions. So we've got a question from Guy. It says, A Master of Jinn is your first novel. What made you want to write in long form? Did you have a bigger story? Is it easier or harder to write a novel? And that's actually a fantastic question, I think, considering the earlier stuff you've had in this world was shorter form and stuff.
So here's the thing. I actually started off way back when I wanted to write. I actually started off as a novel writer. The novels just never went anywhere. And so I kind of decided to train myself to write short stories because I couldn't write short stories. My short stories were always really novellas. And so I kind of went back and I kind of tried to understand the craft of the short stories because they're so different. And as I was doing so, it just so happened that short stories allowed me to break into the science fiction publishing world, the marketing world. And by great chance, thanks to an editor at Tor at the time, Diana Foe, I was able to have A Dead Djinn in Cairo published. And A Dead Djinn in Cairo actually started off as a short story, but on that story, it went overboard and it ended up a novelette. And no one was publishing those for the most part. So I thought it would just disappear into my flash drive or wherever. I said, well, nobody's ever going to get a chance to read it. And by chance, Diana Foe was asking for something like this, and I sent it to her, and it ended up being published on Tor.com in 2016. And really, I had no idea that I was writing more in this world. I had no idea I would write a novel. But the reception of that story, it was such a drive for me that I ended up writing the novella. And then after that, I said, I guess it's time to return to novels. And I wrote a novel. And of course, is it harder? I will say it's very different. Just more to keep up with as I did so. So it just so happened that that's the way the story worked out.
That is fantastic. And I wanted to flag up, like, this is, so A Master of Jinn it's book one. Is it book one of a trilogy? Is it a planned trilogy? Are you just going to keep writing as long as they keep publishing them, or what can we look forward to?
I always say that I had no idea when I wrote that first story that there was going to be any more, and I don't have anything. It's the same thing. I don't have anything in mind now that I've written this first novel, but here I am in a whole novel from a short story that I thought was a one-off. I think that because I like world building, I like to keep a lot of doors open.
That is awesome. Do you actually have, like, in terms of doors open, this is maybe too much of a leading question, but like, so have you considered doing any significant time jumps forward in this world? Like, I'm sort of imagining, like, so I'm thinking in part of Fonda Lee's Greenbone Saga books, right, which are sort of set in a fantasy 1970s, right? I'm just trying to imagine like a 1970s magical Cairo, essentially, and I was wondering if that's something that you had in the cards.
Like what we think of, or like the 1960s, right? Like that heady era of revolution, like it happening, like what does the world look like? And it's really funny because so much of the story, you can tell, I kind of want to be in the 1920s in the Jazz Age.
Yeah.
But I can't. So like in Master of Jinn, I've kind of given a proto-jazz culture that's going on in Cairo, and I'm even intimating that perhaps jazz is going to get its greatest leap here in Cairo. And so, yeah, I've given it thought. Wouldn't it be interesting to see middle-aged Fatma and see what happens with them? I've thought of it. Who knows?
shepherding in a new era of like
Yeah.
fashionable young queers and stuff.
Right.
So
Right.
another
Yeah.
audience, sorry, another audience question. So quickly, this is just a yes or no question. Do your Jin stories and the American set stories take place in the same world?
That's another one people ask. Um, no, they do not. But I also have characters who, jump. I also have characters who understand there are other worlds. So, yeah, would it be wild if, like in, Fatma meets Maurice or somebody from Ring Shout? Yeah, sure, that would be great. But I don't have any plans for that. But please, fan fiction writers, have at it.
Love the crossover fix. Speaking of
Yeah.
Ring Shout, so Kay Lee asks, Ring Shout was a stunning novella. I understand it's been optioned for television. Are you involved in the adaptation process?
I am. That's all I can say is they've
That's all you can
allowed me
say.
to be involved. Even though, for the most part, to tell you the truth, I'm just like the others who are doing this are so understand this world so well, and I do not understand television. I understand there's a difference between writing on the page and the medium of television. So I'm more so a person in the background who is learning, watching, and I get to have my say. But I figure this is a great time to simply take a back seat.
That's awesome. I completely sympathize with, won't push too much on TV questions because there are so
Yeah.
many variables and unknowns and
Yeah,
stuff that
before
I'm
even that
so
even
excited.
happens, right? It's
Yeah.
optioning is a long road. There are a lot of things that are optioned. I will say, I'll put it that way. It's a long road before anything actually happens. So
Well, fingers crossed for you and
yeah.
for that. So I guess let's see. Are there more questions? Let's see. Just going down. Okay, no, that's all good. So I guess my last couple of questions before we wrap up. Can I ask like what? So this is book one. Can I ask what you're working on next? What things we can look forward to you after a
Um,
Master of Jin and stuff?
Yeah, because I like jumping around genres. I have a super secret project that can't be announced right now because the powers that be want to wait to announce it. But it's going to be completely different genre, utterly, right? So that's something I'm working on, and I do have another novella slated. I don't know when it'll come out, but it's also a secondary world fantasy. Um, Much like you, Amal, like your stuff, like good, great secondary world fantasy, and it is about an undead assassin who gets put upon an impossible job.
Oh my goodness.
But it's
Is it
definitely not our world, so it's definitely don't worry about it. It's me. I've done a lot of alternate histories and all this, and so I finally get to play around in a completely new world.
that is super, super exciting. Love to think of an impossible job for an undead assassin. Like,
Ah,
some impossibilities already baked in there, but that sounds really amazing.
right, right.
And can I ask, are you reading anything right now that you would highly recommend other people check out?
Yes, I'm reading. What am I reading? Several things. I'm reading Cadwell Turnbull's
No
No
Gods, No
Gods, No
Monsters?
Monsters. Which I
It's so
pardon?
great! Isn't it amazing?
Isn't it?
It's so
Yes.
great!
So so definitely that, and I finally got the chance. I'm like ending it now. T.J. Klune's House of Cerulean Sea, I think is the name of it. So I'm really enjoying that book as well.
Awesome. I'm just gonna, sorry, to take some time for Cadwell Turnbull's book. I loved No Gods, No Monsters so much, and I did not
Wow.
know it was the first book of a trilogy when I read it. So I got to the
First one
end,
with
and it was
trilogy.
just
Yeah,
like,
wasn't it like when you come to the end, you're like, oh, I can't wait. Yeah,
I really felt like
so
being
much in
like
there.
the coyote chasing the roadrunner off a cliff and looking down and just being like, oh
Right.
no. But anyway,
Yeah.
um, so that has basically brought us to the end of this session. So
Oh,
I'm just going to take a
pretty
last
great.
gander in to make sure we have no questions. No, so I just want to say, Jelly, thank you so much for this time. I'm
Thank
so
you.
delighted to know that there's
Somebody else
more
here is
good
very
things.
delighted to be here. Yes.
Oh, hi, sweetie.
Yes, say
Oh.
hello to the people, Barris. And so, no, it's been great. Thank you. It's been great having this talk with you.
Yes, I just wanted to say thanks to everyone who submitted questions. Thank you so much for those. And please keep enjoying the National Book Festival. You can find it online at loc.gov/bookfest. Yeah, please do check out more of these wonderful conversations that we've got with fantastic people. So thank you so much. Thanks so much to all the wonderful tech people behind the scenes who made this possible, and to all the volunteers working on this. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Bye-bye, everybody.